was assuming by giving him the date. Those of you who know a bit of Greek history will know this was late October 1940. Or he could have meant when the Germans invaded, which was 6 months later, actually on April 6, 1941. But in either case, my father tells me something I had never heard before, that from Thebes, he had seen Germans parachuting into Athens. A few moments later, that is in the time of the interview, after speaking of his family's retreat to a little tiny village to get away from bombs that were being dropped in his own village, I try to return to this topic. Note that even though dates had just come up minutes prior, the issue of when they attempted to leave Greece is contested again. Irene: so you lived there in Kolopetinitsa, this is this very small village, for a while, and then you referred going to Thebes and trying to get out of the country. That was after that period. John: oh no, I never mentioned going to Thebes. No, when we were called by the American embassy to get ready to leave Greece in 1930, and my mother actually chimes in, it must have been 1939. And my dad says, 1939, we got as far as Thebes and the Germans had invaded. And then Irene says, no, the Germans, that's why I'm asking you, Dad. The Germans didn't get there until early in 1941. In 1939, they had invaded Poland, and so the Americans might have been wanting to get you guys home. And my dad goes, let me try to get this straight. From Thebes, I watched the Germans parachuting into Athens. And then I say, okay, good. So I can figure out when that was. And I switch the subject. So here's now the analysis that I offer of that interchange. To recuperate something I had said previously in the analysis, my parents offered the date of 1939, I'm suggesting, not because they remember that the war started in 1939, but because they later learned that the Second World War starts in 1939. So beginning of the war and 1939 are linked in their memories. The new point of interest here is that actually I could not figure out when my father might have seen parachutists, because not a single historical source I consulted, nor specialists, I talked to every major historian of modern Greek history, said anything about parachutists being part of the invasion of Athens.
No.
Yes. We have another expert chiming in.
No.
Now, to be sure, German bombers were involved in the attacks all over Greece. They took out some British and Greek installations, including a very dramatic bombing of the port of Piraeus, of a Scottish warship that was docked there called the Clan Fraser. And it was carrying, the Clan Fraser was carrying 250 tons of explosives. So the Luftwaffe hit resulted not only in the destruction of that particular warship, but of 12 other warships that were parked in that were docked in the port. And it rendered the port non-functional for several weeks. I myself have seen a monument that Greeks have erected near a tree hundreds of yards away from that blast that contains part of exploded ship. My family would not have been able to leave Greece at that point, even if they had succeeded in getting to the port. But why is it that my father insisted to me not once, but twice, that he had seen parachutists? Why did he insist that they were parachuting into Athens when you can't see Athens from Thebes? Those of you, I have maps in the book, but there's a small mountain range that separates Thebes from Athens, and it's just too far to see Athens. Was he trying to aggrandize the situation they were in? And from my tone of voice, you might have realized that I thought he was confabulating, that he was making things up, that it wasn't really the truth and he was exaggerating. I now don't think so. Rather, I believe my father was remembering just how serious the threat to them really was. If my grandmother were trying to get her children out of the country because they thought they were in danger, she would not have abandoned that effort, which is what she did, unless a more immediate danger imperiled them. That is to say, I'm sure my family saw with their own eyes some aspect of the German advance towards the capital that made them fear for their lives, and it frightened them into turning around. That my father has that something entrenched in his memory as parachutists is due, I hypothesize, following Elizabeth Loftus, the expert I quoted to before, not to an intent to lie, but to introduce information that he received in the weeks following this traumatic event, which was the the semi-successful use of German parachutists to secure the Corinth Canal, okay, which was very close to where they were. That was on April 26th. And the German invasion of Crete, which began on May 18th. So if they, in fact, were trying to get to Athens in early April, both of these events would have followed very shortly after. Given the proximity of Itea, that's the town they were in, and Corinth, it's at least hypothetically possible that my father, with his own eyes, saw these parachutists at Corinth. It's not possible that my father saw any aspect of the invasion of Crete. However, the Cretan invasion was discussed all over Europe and the world for its scale, its loss of life on both sides, and its 10,000 parachutists. Germans used 10,000 parachutists going into Crete. So it would have been virtually impossible for my father not to have heard something about the German-Crete-British debacle, German-Greek-British debacle in Crete. He may even have seen images diffused in newspapers or broadsheets, although these were very hard to come by in rural Greece. So again, he may have heard it, but it was so spectacular that it's completely plausible to me that an 11-year-old boy would have visualized that. I myself have seen such images, by the way, from French periodicals of the period of June 41. The fact that information about German parachutists would have come to him so closely following his own eyewitnessing of some aspect of the German invasion would have facilitated the addition of parachutists to his own memory. As Loftus puts it, quoting her once more, post-event information can not only enhance existing memories, but they can also change a witness's memory and even cause non-existent details to become incorporated into a previously acquired memory. So once the idea of parachutists as part of the German invasion had been introduced to my father, it never left. In 2005, he tells me, from those planes, we watched the German, meaning flat areas, we watched the Germans parachute into Athens. Okay. The language of which my father related this memory to me might even reveal the enhancement of it, how the additional element was added. From the planes, meaning P-L-A-I-N-S, he may well have heard a lot of planes, P-L-A-N-E-S, going towards Athens. Okay, and then I go on. Okay, so that just gives you a little bit of the flavor of the way I use the stories to understand certain things about memory. Did you have a question you'd like to interject at that point? No? How's everyone's energy level? Should I read you one more passage? Are you sure? Okay, great. So let me give you a little bit of the logic of this last part of the book that is, I believe, quite unusual. It's written in the form of a letter to my father, where I try to then put all the pieces of this story together and hand him not a completely coherent chronological narrative of what happened to him, because as I've already read you a few parts, I don't think that's possible, but a chronology that would point at what can't be known, what can be known, and what the right emotions should be in relation to those kinds of events that he experienced. So this is the way that the beginning of that section sounds. And it looks like this, right? So co-witnessing to Daddy's war, and you see it says, Dear Dad, right? It starts that, so it's in the second person, addressed to my dad. I write this to you aware of your failing memory. These last months, sometimes you seem to register what I'm telling you, and many times you do not. Nonetheless, I feel the need to try to share certain things with you before you perhaps can follow even less of what I'm telling you. I know you know that for a couple of years now, I've been asking you, Mom, and many others about the years you spent with your mother and siblings in Greece, separated from your father, who had stayed in the United States to earn money. I've gathered those stories together and compared and studied them alongside history books and a few personal documents I could locate in your files, like your passport from 1937, that's what's on the cover, your mother's passport from 1945, your discharge papers, as you like to call them. These are some documents he received from the British for having